Hello and welcome to the 2025 K-State Garden Hour webinar series. We're so glad that you're here with us to kick off the new year. Since we started this webinar in 2020, we've reached over 89,000 gardeners just like you, and we're pleased to continue to offer the K-State Garden Hour series for free into 2025. If you've enjoyed these educational webinars, please consider making a tax-deductible donation to help us support the continuation of this program. A link to donate can be found in the chat or on the K-State Garden Hour website. This webinar is hosted by K-State Research and Extension and is a collaboration of our entire K-State Horticulture Extension team. My name is Matthew McKernan, and I'm today's host. I serve as the horticulture agent for the K-State Research and Extension office in Sedgwick County. Everyone involved in the development of this series is an extension professional from K-State. Most of us have our background in horticulture education or a related discipline, but most of all, we all have a love for educating and sharing important gardening topics. That's one of my favorite parts about the K-State Garden Hour webinars is the passion that each one of our speakers brings. Before we get started today, we do have a couple of housekeeping notes to cover. Please use the Q&A feature for questions related to today's presentation. This is where we'll look for questions to ask our speaker at the end of the webinar during the Q&A session. You should see this button along the bottom tab of your screen that says Q&A. If you click on that, you'll be able to enter your questions there for us to ask our speaker. Today's webinar will also be recorded and posted to the K-State Garden Hour website. We typically upload additional resources related to the topic as well. So if any links are shared today through the chat, you'll be able to find them on our website following this webinar. Our website is also going to be where you have the access to view previous topics as well as upcoming topics in the series. Our moderators today are Pam Paulson and Anthony Reardon. They will be sharing important information through the chat throughout the presentation today. They will also help us facilitate our Q&A portion of the webinar. Today's topic is Sowing Success, Research-Based Gardening for Beginners. I'm pleased to introduce our speaker today, Mr. Scott Eckert, the Harvey County Horticulture Extension Agent. Please give us just a few moments as we transition and share the PowerPoint presentation for today. Thanks for joining us. Nothing's come up quite yet, Scott. But cold morning out there today, and our computers are just as unmotivated as the weather.
Do I need to share again?
Yes, if you would, Scott.
Okay. All right. Tell me when you see it.
Will do.
What did I do? Nothing yet?
Nothing yet. Nope. As we work to get the screen share here, I'd encourage everybody to take a scroll through the chat of the webinar. A lot of people have listed where they're at and how much snow or what the weather is like right now. So got everybody from sunny and 75 down to single digits out there in the chat. So it's quite the weather forecast, it looks like. Still not seeing anything on your screen yet, Scott.
Okay. Anything?
Yep. Now, if you'll play the presentation, we should.
Ah, there we go. Okay. My computer's being slow.
It's as
All
frozen
right.
as fingers. That looks
How
great.
is that?
I'll turn it over to
Okay.
you.
All right. Well, whoop, I jumped ahead there. Welcome everybody to the first webinar, K-State Garden Hour of 2025. It is a pleasure to be here, and I am here with several people. I noticed. I know Matthew mentioned we had some people from Tennessee and a lot of people from Kansas, and looks like we got some folks from Mexico as well. So this will be hopefully something you'll learn from. Some of the things you're probably going to know, but hopefully you will learn, and that's the whole point of the program that we do. So sowing success, research-based gardening for beginners. And I want to start out with, I'm going to cover several things, but I'm going to start with the garden location. And this is big garden, small garden, raised beds. It's any of those things. And it really doesn't matter how big of an area you have. This can apply to all sizes of gardens. And I know people in Newton here that have gardens that are about 3 by 3. They're very small, but they get the most out of it. So there is preparation and planning needed in advance of the first garden season for a new spot. You need a sunny level area away from large trees. Large trees have lots of roots, and those roots do rob soil of moisture, and they will be very competitive with your garden roots on your plants that you're growing there. Very important that you try to choose a spot that's away from large trees. You need a water source. No garden is going to be successful without water. And it sounds obvious, but people have tried to plant things and grow a garden without a water source. So then you end up bucketing water or filling a large tank full of water, and that becomes cumbersome and frustrating. And excuse me, oftentimes they end up giving up on the garden. Also, it doesn't hurt to have protection from wind, and I've got a slide or two that kind of shows some different ways to do that. In Kansas, we have wind, and we had a perfect example this past weekend with the storm we had, the snow that came in, and we had 40-mile-an-hour gust of wind. Of course, it's January, and it's not typically our vegetable growing season, but um, we can get windy, and we can get windier than that. So um, protection from wind, if possible. You need fences around the garden or small shrubs, and buildings can work, but also windbreaks can work as well. So there are a lot of ways to account for a windbreak setting. This is a slide that shows some greens growing, some different kinds of lettuce, and probably some cabbage in there. But if you look around to the back of this, the back of the picture, there is a row of trees, and that does protect your garden from excessive wind. So a row of trees close, but not too close to rob moisture, just to slow the wind. All right, now we get into soil, and soil is a big one. Vegetables grow best in well-drained, fertile soil. And sandy loam soil is ideal. Most of us don't have this though. And where I grew up in the sand hills, we obviously had sand. We could dig holes all day. Where I live now in Newton, there's a lot of clay, and it takes all day to dig a hole. And it's very hard, very, very compact, and we have to fix it to make it work. Um, Compost or manure spread over the garden and worked in a garden with the tiller will improve not only fertility, but also soil condition. Take your soil in for testing to your local extension office and add only the nutrients based on the soil test recommendation. So don't randomly put on phosphorus, potassium, for example, if you don't need it. And most Kansas soils, we don't need any extra phosphorus or potassium. And you can actually get a buildup that causes detrimental growth to plants. So you don't want to do that. All right, this is an illustration of different types, the basic types of soil that we have. We have clay, which is sticky, heavy, and dense. We have sand or sandy soil that is larger particled, heavy, drains extremely well. And then we have silty soil, which is a platy, flat particle size. And then we have loam, and loam is a kind of a mixture of all those together. All right. Before you start a garden, it's always a good idea to do a soil test so you're not randomly putting things on the garden that you don't need. And uh, when we do offer this through extension, you bring your soil in. It takes about a week to get results. A basic test shows phosphorus, potassium, as well as pH and organic matter content of the soil. If you have high pH, for instance, you would incorporate sulfur to that soil. That is one of our best options for trying to lower pH. So if you want to try to grow blueberries or azaleas, this would be something you would add to your soil. Although that's a long order, a difficult thing to do growing blueberries here because our pH is naturally above 7. Um, if your pH is low, which is extremely rare in the 1,500 to 2,000 soil tests I've seen in my county here, you would add lime. But I've never recommended lime because its pH is too high. But you may be in an area that needs it. If your organic matter content is low, you would add compost, old manure, or other organic sources to fix that soil, make it more workable, give it a better root growing environment, and let it and allow it to drain better when there's excess moisture by rainfall or what have you there. And again, only add those amendments or nutrients that are recommended from a test. Going back to that water source, you got to have a reliable water source. Irrigation may need to be added to your garden, which is probably will be, may be needed, may be the wrong way to phrase that. Will be needed, okay, for the garden side in some shape or form. Depending on the garden, hand watering may be an option. If it's small enough, I have a watering wand. That's an effective way of watering. Be sure to water at the base of the plants and not the foliage. Keep the foliage as dry as you can. Install drip irrigation and or sprinklers. And that may be a wise thing to maintain the garden. I know I use soaker hose in my own garden and a community garden that we have here in Newton. Soaker hose we find is pretty effective in keeping our vegetables watered. Water in the morning. Water at ground level. Water in the morning because there's less evaporation. It's cooler and you get more out of your water and your plants tend to absorb it easier. Your soil takes it in easier and it's better utilized by your plants when you can water early in the morning. Water deeply and less frequently. 1 to 2 inches a week will wet 6 to 8 inches of depth in your garden soil. And be sure to use mulch. 2 to 4 inches is ideal. And what mulch does, and we actually will get to that here soon. Mulch is very effective and for a lot of good reasons. So we'll get to that here soon. All right, weed control. This is always one that when somebody calls me and asks me, what do I need to do to start my garden, start a garden spot? We always start talking about weed control. We do talk about the water situation. If you have some weeds like common weeds, not perennial, but common weeds that are annuals that can easily be killed, you can always till those. That's a pretty effective way to get rid of the annuals. You have other weeds, though, that are very persistent, and I'm talking about bindweed and Bermuda grass. And everybody pretty well has probably heard of those um, because they're prevalent. And in our transition zone, they tend to grow very well here. So, um, and one of the things I found, or I have observed about bindweed is it's supposed to be a warm season weed, but I have seen it in the cool months of March already popping up, and there's extremely long root systems to them, and they are very bad for vegetable plants. So so those, and then Bermuda grass is a grass. It's a lawn grass, and in the right situation makes a really nice lawn. But in a garden, it's a weed, and it's an aggressive weed that grows very quickly. And you may need to spend several months killing Bermuda. Um, you can try the using tarps and heat from the sun. You may need to go to more extreme measures and use herbicides to get control of these weeds. All right, the top left picture, the pretty white flower is the infamous bindweed or field bindweed. There's other types of bindweed, but field bindweed is the one that seems to be the one that it hits our gardens the most. And the lower right picture is Bermuda grass, where you can see the stolons and how it spreads on the surface of the soil. Each node there, each little growing point, it can set down roots. So when you're starting a garden, you want to make sure you have control over these two weeds especially. And you may need to spend a season getting rid of these things. This is an example of solarization or using a tarp to heat up the ground and kill out weeds. You could try to smother weeds too with mulch. It doesn't work as good on, I'll have people argue with me with this too. Mulch doesn't work as well with Bermuda grass and bindweed. It can slow them down, but I don't think you'll get 100% kill using mulch alone. All right, your garden, you have your water situation solved, you have your location picked out. Now it's time to sketch the garden. And what you want to do is if this is a family garden, which most of our backyard gardens are, you are going to want to get all the kids involved if you have kids and your spouse or your family members and talk about what you want to grow and understand that everybody probably has a favorite vegetable. You want to, make sure everybody's happy with the garden. That will help keep them involved. So keeping your family members part of the garden is always a good thing, especially when it's 105 degrees outside. The plan may need revisions, may need several revisions, but it will help you keep your mind fixed on the garden and make sure you have, or you can discover whether you have sufficient space to grow what you want to grow. And it's also a reference for years to come, which is nice and handy. It can be used as a guide to purchase your seeds and plants, transplants that you want to put in the garden. And you also want to have labels included in the drawing to make sure you know where you're putting plants and you have each plot marked off. But plant labels are handy where you can put the date and the plant type on there. And so you remember when you see plants start coming up, you're not guessing whether that's a cucumber or a watermelon or a cantaloupe. All right, warm and cool season vegetables. Warm season vegetables are not frost tolerant. They prefer soil temperatures of at least 55 degrees, if not warmer. Tomatoes, peppers, melons, squashes, sweet potatoes, corn, and beans are examples of warm season vegetables. Cool season vegetables that are the most tolerant will grow at soil temperatures as cold as 45 degrees and may tolerate hot soil temperatures. Lettuce, spinach, radishes, carrots, broccoli, cabbage, beets, those are all considered cool season. Some of those are cole crops, C-O-L-E, and like your cabbages and broccoli and things like that. But we have two categories of vegetables, warm season and cool season. All right, I get this call probably 5 or 6 times a year, and it's when is the last freeze? They're ready to plant their garden. When is the last freeze in the spring? And this is a map of Kansas, and I don't know how well you can actually see it through the webinar here, but if you are looking at southeast Kansas, the lower right corner, their last freeze averages April 1st to April 5th. If you go up to St. Francis, Kansas in the Northwest, they're looking at May 5 to May 12. So quite a bit later for the last potential frost or freeze for them. In my area in central Kansas, I usually tell people about the 20th of April, although many times I have been tricked by Mother Nature and I have been frozen out after May 1, probably 6 or 7 times since I've been here since 1999. So Mother Nature has her own mind and makes the rules. So, but our average in this map is listed there, and you can find your county and kind of get an idea of when your last spring freeze will be. And this is based on 32 degrees over a 29-year period. So it really covers a lot of time and area. All right, this is the back of a seed packet. And I threw this in here because if you're not sure what you want to plant or know much about a plant or how to plant it, seed companies, when they package plants, they will often put on information on the back of the packet that tells you how deep to plant, how quick they germinate, whether it can handle some shade or it needs full sun, how deep to plant, and how, in this case, it's cucumber, straight 8. You thin them to 2 to 3 plants per group because you plant them in a group if you choose. And it's got an outdoor planting map of the United States on there. And Kansas is in green, and it says you can plant these May through July. So there really is a lot of information on the back of a seed packet. That's pretty handy. All right, soil temperature again. Soil that is in that 45-degree range is considered best for cool season vegetables. And warm season, 55-degree soil. So like corn would be one of these, sweet corn at 55 degrees. Very warm season, they're like 60 degrees or better. So you're looking at peppers, sweet potatoes, basil likes it warm like that. So for soil temperature, a rule of thumb, the soil isn't warm enough for sowing until you can sit on it with your pants down. All right, optimizing garden space. A wide variety of vegetables can be grown in Kansas, as we well know. And I have learned over the years that I now know how to grow sweet potatoes, which my dad never grew, or I never had it growing up. And another one is my dad could never grow onions, but we grow onions in our community garden here now, and they do very well. And so we can grow all kinds of things. Tomatoes, there's probably 4,000 varieties of tomatoes in the world. So there ought to be a tomato that will grow for you. But space and preference play an important part in deciding what to grow. Beans, beets, summer squash, peppers, tomatoes, lettuce, onions, radishes, turnips are all well adapted for growth when space is limited. And sweet corn, vine squash, cucumbers, pumpkins, watermelon require more space and should be considered only if adequate space is available. Alternatively, consider using staking or trellising options to allow for vining crops in small garden areas. Don't be afraid to experiment with unfamiliar vegetables. And so, not being familiar with sweet potatoes, my experience with those turned out great. Kansas is a great climate for sweet potatoes. Okay, everybody asked about compost. That's the stuff that we throw out, our potato peels and banana peels and old stale bread and leaves and grass clippings and things like that. We put them in a pile, we make compost out of it in the backyard. Using compost, heavy, tight clay soils benefit from loosening effects of the organic material. Sandy soils also benefit from improved water holding capacity and fertility organic matter provides. Apply compost at a rate of 50 to 100 pounds per 100 square feet of garden area. That's about 1 or 2 bushels of material for every 10 square feet. Till in the fall or spring before planting. Each plant spacing, each vegetable crop has different spacing requirements to maximize its productivity. Too close will reduce yields and increase disease issues. Too far can waste usable space and increase weed problems. Very large gardens are often planted in rows with significant space between rows to accommodate larger plants or tillage equipment. Medium-sized gardens, small gardens, or gardens that use no-till techniques may arrange plants more closely together. When to plant? Spinach, lettuce, radish, peas, and green onions can be harvested early in the season. The same space is then available for late season crops of beans, eggplant, tomatoes, or potatoes. A double crop type situation. Plant lettuce, radish, or spinach between potatoes, cabbage, or other cole crops. Cole crops include broccoli and other cabbage relatives. Before potatoes or cole crops get very large, the other vegetables will have been harvested. So then they have space to expand and grow. All right. This may be a little tricky to see, but this has a spring and summer and fall months listed at the top. The vegetable crop listed on the right column and when to plant what vegetable. So for instance, I'm just going to put talk about beets. Beets typically you plant in March and April, and you actually can harvest them in a little later, a few months later, but you can also plant in the fall when it's cool. So beets like the cooler weather. And also something like, let's go down to tomato. Tomato, you're going to plant May. I'm not crazy about planting tomato in May after being frozen out too many times, but tomatoes, you have a May planting time and harvest in July, like 4th of July for here. And but this is a reference for when you plant and when you harvest. Fertilization. Soluble houseplant fertilizer as sold in garden centers and nurseries. Young tender seedlings are easily damaged by too much fertilizer. These are young plants. Now, apply fertilizer about half the recommended strength a few days after seedlings have emerged have germinated. After that, fertilize according to the recommendations on the fertilizer label. All right, transplants or seed or other. Plants typically planted from seed include vine crops, corn, lettuce, spinach, radishes, beets, turnips. These are directly planted into the garden area. Transplants, which are small plants, tomato, pepper, eggplant, examples of those. Okra is another one. They're planted as small plants, already started. Slips, sweet potatoes. So if you grow sweet potatoes, that is a piece of plant that you put in the ground. Roots, examples of that would be asparagus, and there are others. And potato, we don't use a seed per se, we use a piece of potato and we call it a seed potato. All right, producing transplants. Most vegetable transplants require 4 to 8 weeks from the time seeds are sown until plants are ready for transplanting in the garden. Most seed packets provide the information. You can also use the Kansas Garden Guide for planting information, which was recently revised. And producing transplants, you have to have a container to put them in, or containers. There are different types of containers you can use, recycling paper cups or milk cartons, clay pots, peat pots, flats. Other packages can be used. Containers must have drainage though. If you don't have drainage, you're probably going to kill your plants, kill your seedlings. This slide shows the different, that's a potting media on the left. The middle is the beginning of seedlings emerging. And on the picture on the right is our tomato transplants ready to go in the garden. All right, transplants continued. Transplants, they can be started by seeding vegetables pretty thick in a flat. To prevent diseases, a disease-free soilless potting seed mix or seed starting mix should be used. And there are seed starting mixes you can buy. They're finer than the picture prior to this slide. Cover lightly with a thin layer of planting medium, water gently. As a general rule, seeds need to be covered to a depth twice their diameter. Small seeds should be planted 1/4 to 1/2 inch deep. Place the flat under lights or in a sunny window and keep them moist until until germination. Moisture is especially important for germination. Be sure not to overwater. Overwatering is probably the #1 killer of plants in general. After seeding emergence and have 2 to 4 small leaves, they should be replanted in pots and to grow until transplanted in the garden. Lift seedling plants from the flat, grasp the leaves, not the stem of the small plants. All right, temperature producing transplants. Most annual plants and vegetables prefer night temperatures from 60 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Day temperatures may run about 10 degrees higher. If temperatures are warmer than this, plants become leggy. Cool season vegetable crops and a few flowers prefer night temperatures no higher than 55 degrees Fahrenheit and day temperatures near 65 degrees. An unused bedroom, basement, or sun porch is often a good location for these plants. So if you have a sun porch especially, that's a great spot. But a basement with good lights is really ideal as well. Okay, this is a tomato plant or tomato plants, and the handling of small seedlings to move them from the seeding tray to the small container, you would use your fingers and handle them by those true leaves that are there that the arrows are pointing to. The stem of these plants are tiny, small, and they're easily crushed. So you don't want to handle them by the stem. So you got to go underneath the plant and gradually bring it up with a finger or a pencil or a popsicle stick, and then grab them by those true leaves and then move them over into the new pot. You can also just sow directly into pots. One seedling per pot usually, unless it's a large pot. Water gently and place in a sunny window under lights until planting time. Seeding can be started directly into individual pots. Fill the pots with soilless media or seed mix. Tamp down. Seeds should be planted at a rate of 1 to 2 seeds per pot. And we're talking about a 2-inch or so size pot. Cover lightly with a thin layer of planting medium and water gently. Place the pots under lights or sunny window. Keep them moist until seeds germinate. After seedlings emerge and have 2 to 4 leaves, any extra plants can be thinned out of the pots to encourage strong growth of a single plant in each pot. So you're going to be thinning a lot of those out. Some of them won't germinate, so that's why your seed a little heavier. Hardening off. This is the gradual withholding water so the plants are not wilting but are getting less water than normal. You're also gradually exposing plants to the outside condition by placing the plants in a protected location outdoors. Avoid fertilizing, especially with nitrogen. You're getting them used to being on their own outside in the garden. All right. In the garden, you also want to stagger planting. And what this is you're planting every so many days so you keep a crop supply growing all season long. Or in this case, with radishes, you're looking at, as long as the cool season holds out, you can grow radishes. But about every 4 or 5 days, instead of planting 5,000 seeds all at once, you're planting much less than that in several rows, 4 to 5 days apart. You can also stagger lettuce, beans, sweet corn, and peas. I see this a lot with beans and sweet corn in my area. Select a place along one side of the garden for crops such as rhubarb, asparagus, and strawberries. These are perennials that will come back on their own without replanting. If they're planted in the garden, they'll be in the way during the tilling operation. Purchasing transplants. This is always an important topic because you want to buy the best that you can. Look for healthy transplants, short stocky plants with short internodes and thick stems, free of disease or insects, uniform dark green leaves, white roots with vigorous growth, but not much so that they wrap around the soil medium in the pot. Then they're starting to get old and compact, and they are not as healthy as you would really want to have. All right, I wanted to touch on common vegetable crop families because this is important in the rotation of the garden crops, which we'll get into. Onions, for instance, are in the allium family, along with leeks and garlic. The brassica family, that's the broccoli and cabbage and cauliflower and the ever popular kale and radishes. Cucumber family, melons, gourds, pumpkins, squash. Legumes, you have beans and peas. So, and I'm going to mention tomatoes are we just call it the tomato family. But tomatoes are all related to eggplant, ground cherry peppers, potatoes, tomatillos. They're related. And when we get into families, this is where rotation is important. Rotation is planting the same crop. Well, planting in the same crop every year can result in a buildup of insect and disease pressure. You can also result in a reduction of soil fertility and an increase in weeds. Planting vegetables from the same plant family in a different area each year will help support soil health and reduce insect and disease challenges. 3-year rotation between different plant families is recommended. In a large garden, it can be simpler to move crop families to a different area each year, especially when it's possible to include cover crops in the rotation. In a small garden, including raised bed gardens, it is important to move plants from each crop family as much as feasibly each year, even if it's a short distance. Even if it's a few feet, that is still good. If crop rotation is not feasible due to the size of the garden or crop selected, it becomes even more important to select disease-resistant varieties and closely monitor soil health. And you can see on plant labels when you buy them whether it'll be indicated on the label whether it's virus resistant, disease resistant, things like that. So if you can't rotate, work on finding those plants that you can see resistance in or have resistance of disease. This is an example of a 3-year crop rotation. Year one at the top end or the north end, the cucurbit family, which is the melons, is on the north end, for instance, on year one. The second year, the cucurbit family has moved down and the tomato family has moved to the north end. The third year, we have the brassica. We have the broccoli and the cauliflower on the north end. The onions are in the second spot. The tomato family has moved to the middle, and the cucurbit family is getting closer to the north end. So there's a constant rotation of crops each year, which helps keep disease and insect pressure under control. And weeds. All right, deciding between an in-ground or raised bed garden. There are many reasons to have your garden growing directly in the ground and many reasons to consider a raised bed garden. Raised beds may be particularly good choice if you have a heavy clay soil with poor drainage characteristics. Raised beds gardens allow soil improvement to occur right away and provide ideal soil for optimum plant growth. Good choice if you need a garden area that's more accessible due to physical limitations, such as the inability to kneel or bend significantly. Raised beds can help you choose space efficiently and maximize harvest. They're also good if you make them out of railroad ties. You will have a place to sit real easy, and it's easier to control weeds, which I have found that to be very pleasant with raised beds. Okay. Raised beds, kind of the cons or the negative side of that, they can be expensive to start, but they do last several years. So that expense up front, I think, is worth it. If you got to go purchase lumber, potting soil, those kind of things, you have some expense up front, but in the end, it's worth it. And they do dry out quicker, making them more challenging to irrigate during the heat and drought. So you got to make sure you have, a good plan for watering, a good watering system. Get those soaker hoses put in there or drip lines, those kind of things, and make sure you're watering them as they need it. Mulching in the garden. Mulches hold soil moisture in the soil, obviously. Prevent weed growth. They smother weeds. Reduces soil crusting and splashing. And splashing reduces disease problems. Splashing increases disease problems. Mulching reduces that. Mulching helps keep the soil cooler in the summer. And at the end of the year, or in the fall, you can till it in and help the organic matter content of the soil. All right, in Kansas, again, we mentioned the wind does blow, and we have ways to, and it gets cold. We have ways to help us with that when we have plants already in the ground. Most people are crazy and are a little crazy sometimes, and they plant their tomatoes in April, sometimes early April, and then they look at the forecast. Oh, it's going to freeze like for a week. It's going to be 25 for the next week, and my tomatoes are in the ground. Well, if you just hold off till May, the chances of a freeze, of course, are less. Well, we can use things like cloches or cloches, however you say that. I've heard it pronounced many ways, but this is a protection from wind and freeze for tomato plants or those tender plants. And that's the left picture. On the right, somebody collects and saves their milk cartons, and they cut out the bottoms and they use those around their plants to get them either started or just to protect them from the cold and the wind. And that's a very inexpensive way of gardening right there. Wind protection can also be some kind of framing structure around a raised bed. In this case, there's plastic wrapped around a frame that was built to protect these tomato plants. Helps a lot. It's very handy, and it does work. This is a large area. This is not most people's backyard, of course, but they're using the grass. In this case, it's the rye. They're using a rye cover crop for whatever they planted there in the middle under plastic. But that grass is a windbreak, and it helps control damage from wind to those plants. I have also got cold frames, and cold frames are a small greenhouse type of structure where you can harden off plants, you can start seeds, you can put your cold crops in there to get them started, and you can actually grow radishes and other vegetables in there that like the cooler weather. But it's a little warmer than the outside, and this one is a good example with snow on the ground. All right, and along with the gallon jugs, this is a 5-gallon bucket. The bottom's cut out, and you just put it around your tomato plant when they're young. Take them off before they get too big, but it does protect the young plants from getting whipped around by that Kansas wind in the spring. All right, trellises. And I've got, these are just things that a gardener might want to have in their garden area to use. But trellises are great when you have limited space and you have viney plants. So like cucumber, for instance, they're just reusing a pallet here on the left. And those cucumbers are going to climb that pallet and they're going to produce. And the thing about a trellis is, you don't get dirt on the fruit that way. On the right is a cattle panel, and not only can they be used to keep your livestock in pens, but they can also be used to grow whatever vine plant you want to grow on there, and it works very effectively. All right, tomato cages come in all shapes and sizes. They can be wood, wire, bamboo. I've seen somebody use pallets for a tomato cage as well. But if you don't have a tomato cage, tomatoes just kind of flop over. So you need something to hold them up, and it keeps them vertical. So that keeps your space requirement for them down. Because if you don't use a cage or something like that for tomatoes, just lay down on the ground and sprawl, they'll still produce. But this is what no cage tomatoes look like. So, all right. We are kind of winding down here. I just wanted to mention a general list of gardening supplies. And actually, this is for a new gardener, or it could be for somebody that's experienced that may be thinking, what do I need now? What do I don't have from this list? So you need a spading fork, a shovel, or a tiller. And I have a picture of a nice tiller there. That's a front tine tiller. Once you get to going, your garden gets bigger, you might want to get a rear tine tiller. But a tiller works the soil up for you really well. You need a hoe or garden rake, a trowel, sprayer or duster for insecticide, herbicide use. You want to label your rows so you know what you have, and put the variety of watermelon or tomato on there, because if you do well with your crop, with your vegetables, your neighbors are going to want to know what they are. What variety is that? And instead of scratching your head, you can go, oh, I can go check my garden and check my label and see what I have. And everybody wants to know what variety you have, especially tomato. String or yardstick. My dad didn't plant any vegetable without a string to keep the rows straight. The rows had to be straight. And if you've ever planted a crooked row, you'll understand once that crooked row is up and growing, you can't change it. You got to do it at the beginning with straight rows. You're going to want some fertilizer. And again, based on the soil test, that's how you would fertilize. Fungicides and insecticides, if you need it. If you run into insect issues, you might want some insecticide for sure. Of course, you need hoses and irrigation supplies. Compost, manure. If you know a farmer or you make your own compost, reuse what you produce. Use grass clippings, leaves, things like that. Make your own compost, but you can also buy it. And of course, trellises, stakes, and cages is necessary. Okay, that is the end of my presentation. And if you have questions, I will entertain those. Do I need to stop share?
That would be great if you could do that, Scott.
Okay.
So we do have several questions here for you. I'll start with one we have up here at the top. It says we have a modest community garden, school garden that is made up of 3 raised beds. We are monarch way stations, so we have to include various milkweed and other pollinator plants. My question is, do you have suggestions on what veggies are the easiest to grow through the summer that would be good companion plants for these pollinator plants?
That's a good question. There are some herbs that are used as pollinator plants for the butterfly larvae and that kind of thing. And I don't know if there's one that somebody could post up there. I don't have a site in mind, but there are plants that can be put in, um, and I don't have them on my in my head right now to tell you right now, but
Sure.
there are.
Okay. Then our next question here says, with so much focus on no-till in agriculture, why is tilling in the garden still in practice?
It's just to work in organic matter. And actually the best way to till is with a shovel and really not with a tiller. A tiller is good at mixing straw and hay and that into the top part of the soil. Um, but you also compact when you till. So I have switched to a no-till in my garden at home, and I've been doing that for about 7 years now. And the first 4 or 5 went really well. And right now I'm having issues, and I need to figure out what my issues are and fix it because I'm not doing something right now, something correctly that I need to fix. And of course, last year it could have just been the drought too. Well, and I've had some surgical things happening. I haven't done a lot of gardening in my backyard for a while, but anyway, yeah, I do no till and tilling just so I just dig the small holes and plant my tomato plants and um, and leave it at that.
Okay. So we have another question here. It says, do you have a tip on how to make my tomatoes taste like real tomatoes and not bland ones?
Okay, pick them as they start to turn from the plant. So as they're growing outside, they start to get their color. That color starts to come in green to red. It kind of goes green, and then there might be a tinge of orange, and then eventually red will come on. What I would suggest is picking them then and bringing them inside, room temperature, ambient temperature in the house on a counter. Some people put them in a bag. You could just set them on a counter and they'll go ahead and ripen inside. And that should allow the tomato to reach its potential flavor that it's going to get to. So, and other varieties of tomatoes are sweeter. Others have a more of a tangy texture, a tangy taste to them. So that's why there's 4,000 varieties of tomatoes. Tomato preference is it's like wine. It's very broad.
Another, excuse me, another question, back to the no-till that we were discussing. Is there noticeable production differences between tilled gardens and non-tilled gardens?
I haven't read anything recent, research wise, but when you don't disturb the soil, the network of microorganisms and worms and insects and roots develops better. The what do they call it? Biodiversity or whatever in the soil is better. So it should be a little more productive in theory, but I don't know. I don't know what research is saying right now about that.
Another person, excuse me, another person asks here, do you have general recommendations as far as types of fertilizers to look for and utilize?
If you don't do a soil test, I would only use ammonium sulfate. That is nitrogen only with some sulfur, because I would bet your soil is probably high in pH. So the sulfur and the ammonium sulfate will help a little bit with the alkalinity of your soil. So but nobody can tell you what kind of fertilizer you need without a soil test. So that's why the soil test is so important. Just to know what you have. If you do a test and your soil is perfect, then there you go. You have perfect soil, perfect
And then
nutrients in your
is
soil.
there a type of all-encompassing fertilizer that is the best to use if you do use a soil test?
All encompassing.
Well, I suppose just a best nitrogen source is probably what they
Oh,
asked.
I honestly, ammonium sulfate is my go. I don't know what other agents would say about that, but I wouldn't use my dad would always use triple 13, and all you do is you build up your phosphorus and potassium in your soil, and you don't need that. So, and triple 13 is cheap. I don't recommend it unless you need phosphorus and potassium, but I would do ammonium sulfate or just a nitrogen only, like a urea, a urea type, which is just nitrogen. But what I recommend a lot here in Harvey County is ammonium sulfate.
Okay. We do have one more in the chat here. It says, I have struggled with no-till, but I think it is worthy. Crabgrass still comes up through the cardboard. Do you have any how do you best manage laying a new no-till area?
For control of crabgrass?
Crabgrass and weeds in general, I think. They have poison ivy listed here as well.
Okay. You're probably going to be honestly best off using an herbicide. Poison ivy is difficult. You're probably going to spend a season getting this area under control. So a combination of a triclopyr probably for the poison ivy and some Roundup or glyphosate for the crabgrass in the garden.
And then we did have a question here about just amending soil. I think they're talking about sulfur pellets and maybe alternatives to amending some pH if you don't necessarily have the means to buy those more expensive fertilizers.
So that's more of a amending the soil type of question.
Yeah.
Well, I've always thought if you do nothing else to soil, add organic matter. It improves sandy soil, it improves clay soil. So if you know somebody or you make your own compost, I would just add that. And I know people that just put compost on as their fertilizer and they grow a nice garden. Some people would rather supplement some nitrogen in there. I don't know if that answered the question, but
Yes, it did. Yep.
okay.
So I think we are coming to an
Manure is
end
pretty
here.
cheap.
Well, I think
will
that's a
pass it
great
back to Matt.
recommendation and a great place for us to wrap up for the day. As always, we have many more questions than we have time for, but you can be sure to check out our website for several links and articles related to this session on our website. We hope that the resources will help you answer your questions. And as always, if you need additional information, please feel free to reach out to your local K-State Research and Extension office. Once again, thank you for joining the K-State Garden Hour webinar series hosted by K-State Research and Extension. We're so glad you were able to join us today to learn about sowing success, research-based gardening for beginners. You can visit the K-State Garden Hour website to view the recorded Garden Hour archive or to make your tax-deductible donation to support the continuation of this webinar series. This session was recorded and will be posted to the website by tomorrow afternoon. After this webinar ends today, you'll receive a prompt to take an evaluation survey. We would encourage you to please fill out this survey as we greatly appreciate your feedback. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us by email at gardenhour@ksu.edu. Thank you again, and we hope to continue to see you next month as we continue our K-State Garden Hour webinars through 2025. Thank you.
Thank you.